Racist cop stops black woman at airport. Unaware she's an undercover FBI agent on a secret mission. In the bustling core of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, tension simmers beneath the surface. A hurried traveler, a black woman with a leather satchel and unwavering determination in her gaze, moves swiftly, intent on catching her connecting flight. Yet, in the next moment, an overzealous officer singles her out, fixating more on the color of her skin than the urgency in her step. Eyes narrow, accusations linger unspoken, and whispers ripple through the crowd. But no one, not even the self-important officer, suspects that this seemingly ordinary passenger is, in fact, an undercover FBI agent carrying secrets that could dismantle a hidden enemy within America's borders. The day had started like any other at Hartsfield-Jackson, one of the world's busiest airports. Lines snaked through terminals, families clustered around departure screens, and business travelers sipped coffee while hammering away on their laptops. Announcements of flight delays crackled over the loudspeakers, blending into the chaotic hum of travelers. Amid this controlled disorder, Naomi Cross walked briskly toward a gate in Concourse F, her posture upright, her gaze steady. She wore simple jeans, a fitted black blazer, and comfortable flats, an outfit deliberately chosen to blend into the sea of passengers. But Naomi's focus was razor-sharp. Her mind replayed the details of that morning's briefing. She was set to meet a contact who claimed to have crucial intelligence regarding a high-stakes federal investigation. Though she was officially on vacation, her true agenda was anything but leisurely. Months earlier, the FBI had uncovered a dangerous network operating in multiple U.S. cities, including Atlanta. Her team suspected that certain law enforcement officials were shielding illicit operations, activities involving narcotics, weapons, and possibly even terror financing. Naomi's objective was to verify her contact's claims and uncover the evidence linking these illicit dealings to a powerful underground syndicate. She had prepared for nearly every contingency, both mentally and physically. Her brown eyes swept the concourse as she set down her carry-on bag. She had been instructed to watch for a man in a navy blue windbreaker who would approach her near the bookstore by her gate. The handoff was meant to be quick and discreet. Yet, as she took in her surroundings, a subtle unease crept over her. Boarding announcements rang out, strangers brushed past her, and the sterile fluorescent lights did little to ease her nerves. She inhaled deeply, schooling her expression into one of casual indifference. This was routine for thousands of travelers. But for her, this exchange could mean life or death. Just as she mentally reviewed her next steps, she felt it. A presence behind her, brimming with suspicion. Naomi's instincts, honed by years of FBI training, flared to life. Someone was watching her. She resisted the urge to turn too abruptly. Instead, she shifted her stance as though checking a nearby flight board and caught a glimpse of a uniformed officer. He was a white man, stocky with a sharp, hawkish expression. His navy blue airport precinct uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming under the overhead lights. The name tag read Truman. At first, Naomi thought nothing of it. Airport police were everywhere, monitoring crowds, ensuring security. But the way he scrutinized her face, the way his gaze lingered a beat too long, set off alarms in her mind. Casually, she wheeled her carry-on forward, pretending to focus on the overhead displays. Maybe he was just scanning the crowd for suspicious behavior. Maybe this was nothing more than routine vigilance. But his scrutiny felt too deliberate, too intense. It was as if, in his mind, she had already been deemed guilty, without cause, without evidence. Looking around, she saw travelers of all backgrounds moving about freely, yet his focus remained solely on her. A mix of irritation and apprehension stirred within her. She was no stranger to racial profiling in airports. She had heard countless stories from colleagues about humiliating detentions and unjustified searches. Even as an FBI agent, she wasn't immune to these realities. Her bureau credentials were safely tucked away, but she couldn't risk revealing them prematurely. She had a mission to complete. Keeping her emotions in check, Naomi steadied herself. But her pulse quickened as Truman started moving toward her. A ripple of unease coursed through her. Would he demand identification? Would he derail her meeting? The last thing she needed was a confrontation that blew her cover. Tightening her grip on her phone, she felt the weight of not just the FBI's trust, but also the silent expectations of her community. One wrong move, one unnecessary escalation, and her operation could crumble. She needed to maintain control. Yet, Officer Truman's hard stare made it clear. He wasn't just wary of a traveler in a black blazer. His distrust ran deeper. And so, with nerves of steel, Naomi made a choice. If he approached, she would remain composed, polite, and above all, unshaken. If the situation spiraled, she would do everything in her power to keep it from turning into the kind of headline she had spent her career working against. Naomi Cross was no stranger to adversity. Born in a modest Charlotte, North Carolina neighborhood, she had been raised by a hardworking postal worker father and a middle school math teacher mother. Even as a child, she had displayed a quiet but unbreakable resilience, the kind that formed from witnessing injustice but never allowing it to crush her spirit. She had long lost count of how many times she had been followed in department stores or pulled over for random checks. But instead of allowing these microaggressions to deter her, she let them fuel her ambition. Determined to challenge the very system that often sought to diminish her, she pursued a degree in criminal justice. While others complained about systemic bias, she made the conscious decision to work from within, believing that true reform required people willing to stand inside the system and demand better. In lectures about profiling, about the fine lines between security and discrimination, she was always the first to raise her hand with a sharp, unrelenting question. And now here she was, standing in the middle of an airport, once again facing the scrutiny of a system that had never been designed with her in mind. But if Officer Truman thought she would back down, he was about to be proven very wrong. She graduated summa cum laude, with professors calling her an unstoppable force of reason. Her acceptance into the FBI was hard-earned. She spent countless hours preparing for the entrance exam, the physical endurance tests, and the rigorous interviews. Never once did she allow the pressure to shake her confidence. At Quantico, she kept her head high, outperformed many of her peers in marksmanship and strategic analysis, and quickly built a reputation for tackling challenges with unwavering resolve. But even there, she was tested more than others, singled out as if she needed to prove she truly belonged. That only fueled her determination. After completing her training, Naomi took assignments across the country, Boston, Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, each time infiltrating high-risk criminal circles, from money laundering operations to cybercriminal networks. She had a natural gift for undercover work, exuding a calm confidence that led people to underestimate her at their own peril. She could seamlessly blend into a gathering of high-stakes gamblers, pass for an unassuming neighbor, or step into the role of a corporate whistleblower, whatever the mission required. Yet, discrimination never fully disappeared. There were times when local law enforcement partners eyed her with unwarranted suspicion, or when a suspect would spit out racial slurs in a last-ditch effort to throw her off. Naomi learned to stay composed, letting their ignorance strengthen her resolve. She kept her personal life to a minimum. Friendships, dating, everything took a backseat to her career. Not because she lacked emotion, but because she had internalized a harsh truth. Any lapse in focus could cost her or someone else their life. In recent years, her work had become even more specialized. She volunteered for a federal task force dedicated to exposing corruption within law enforcement, cartels, and extremist groups. Naomi believed in eradicating wrongdoing, especially when it had infiltrated the very institutions meant to uphold justice. That belief had led her into numerous covert operations, often in communities where trust in the police was already hanging by a thread. This latest mission in Atlanta was another test, one requiring her to navigate a web of hidden alliances and betrayals. Intelligence suggested that a major gun smuggling operation was funneling weapons from the southeastern U.S. to international buyers, using compromised law enforcement officers to ensure its success. Naomi's informant claimed to have solid evidence, a flash drive containing documents that could expose the network's inner workings. If those files led back to powerful figures, the FBI could dismantle the operation from the top down. And now, before she could even reach her contact, she found herself facing a potential threat, not from an organized crime syndicate, but from a racist cop who could derail her mission before it even began. Her entire career had been built on perseverance, on never backing down, no matter how steep the odds. She wasn't about to stop now. Officer Hal Truman was a 20-year veteran of the Atlanta Airport Police. At first glance, he fit the textbook image of a seasoned law enforcer, a broad-shouldered man with a stern gaze and an air of authority. But behind his sharp blue eyes lay a darker truth, a lifetime of unresolved bitterness, deep-seated prejudices, and a past riddled with skeletons that grew heavier each year. Born in a small Georgia town, Hal had grown up in an environment that never challenged the biases he absorbed as a child. He'd heard racist jokes from uncles, seen his father and grandfather treat black neighbors with thinly veiled contempt, and never once encountered anyone who told him those attitudes were wrong. He joined the police force in his early 20s, convinced that wearing a badge would grant him the respect and power he craved. But that hunger for control soon twisted into something far uglier. He discovered that his uniform gave him the ability to intimidate those he saw as beneath him. Over the years, complaints piled up within internal affairs. Travelers and even fellow officers had accused him of being unreasonably aggressive, particularly toward minorities. But in the chaos of airport security, those complaints were often brushed aside. Other times, Hal manipulated the narrative to frame his actions as necessary protocol. He had allies in the department, like-minded officers who looked the other way or outright defended him. If someone pressed too hard, they found themselves conveniently reassigned. To his superiors, he was a dedicated cop working a high-pressure job. In reality, Hal saw his badge not as a tool to protect the public, but as a weapon to enforce his worldview. He thrived on control, especially over those he resented the most. Every time he spotted a well-dressed black traveler walking through the airport with confidence, boarding first class, speaking with intelligence, an ember of rage flickered inside him. Why were they so sure of themselves? Why did they act as if they belonged in the spaces he believed were reserved for people like him? Despite his polished exterior, Hal was drowning in insecurity. His wife had left him 5 years ago, citing emotional abuse and an unchecked hostility that seeped into every aspect of their lives. His career had stalled, promotions slipping through his fingers due to his reputation as a loose cannon. Frustrations built, and he vented them in the only way he knew how, by doubling down on his worst impulses. A few colleagues had tried, early in his career, to steer him toward change, suggesting therapy or counseling. He dismissed them with a sneer. To Hal Truman, therapy was for the weak. Over time, whispers circulated that Hal might be receiving under-the-table payments to turn a blind eye to certain cargo shipments. Nothing was ever proven, but rumors rarely arise without reason. Some baggage handlers noted that Hal seemed unusually familiar with particular shipments that bypassed standard screening. He would wave them through with minimal inspection, jotting down a few notes on his clipboard. When questioned, he would insist that everything was in order. But the more it happened, the more those paying attention began to grow suspicious. As Hal's personal life unraveled, certain unscrupulous figures within the airport saw an opportunity. His deep-seated prejudices made him easy to manipulate. If someone needed a passenger of color harassed or a rival shipment delayed, Hal was the perfect pawn. A modest bribe or an unofficial favor was all it took. Hal would handle the dirty work, convinced he was upholding some warped sense of justice. He never imagined facing real consequences. In his mind, his badge granted him untouchable authority. The constant influx of travelers at the airport provided an endless supply of targets, allowing him to wield his power without drawing too much attention. After all, airport security was strict for everyone. If a traveler felt singled out, Hal figured they wouldn't stick around long enough to lodge a formal complaint. And even if they did, who would believe them over a long-serving officer? This was the mindset Hal Truman carried when he spotted Naomi Cross in the crowd. A poised black woman, moving with quiet confidence. Something about her composure unsettled him, triggering an all-too-familiar irritation. He had seen her kind before, self-assured, unafraid, arrogant, rebellious. He had no idea she was an FBI agent. He only saw what he wanted to see, a target, someone he could confront, perhaps demean, all while hiding behind the authority of his uniform. Little did he know that uniform and the hidden loyalties it shielded were on a collision course with a woman who would shatter everything he took for granted. Naomi kept her posture relaxed as she scanned the concourse, but tension coiled in her stomach. She glanced at her watch. Her contact was supposed to arrive in 5 minutes, yet there was no sign of him. The unease only deepened as Officer Hal Truman approached, his heavy boots echoing against the polished floor. He stopped just a foot away, his hands hovering near his belt. "Ma'am," he said, his voice laced with forced politeness, barely concealing the hostility beneath. "Can I see some identification, please?" His jaw was tight, a thin vein pulsing at his temple. Naomi gave him a practiced, courteous smile. "Certainly, officer," she replied smoothly. "May I ask why you need to see my ID? I'm just waiting for my flight." Hal's lips curled slightly, the beginnings of a sneer. "Security protocol. Standard checks, ma'am," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, as if reciting a well-rehearsed excuse. "We've had some reports of suspicious individuals in this area." Naomi retrieved her driver's license from her wallet, keeping her FBI credentials carefully hidden. Flashing them now could compromise her mission. She handed over the license with steady hands. "I hope you're not suggesting that I look suspicious," she said evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing even a flicker of frustration. Any sign of anger, any hint of resistance, could escalate the situation. Hal's eyes flicked over her license, though he didn't bother to radio it in. This wasn't about protocol, it was about intimidation. A few bystanders had begun to slow their steps, sensing the tension. Naomi felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain still. "You're from Charlotte?" Hal asked, his tone shifting into something more probing. "What brings you to Atlanta, Miss Cross?" He sounded less like an airport officer and more like a small-town cop trying to corner a suspect in an interrogation room. Naomi gave the response she had rehearsed. "Visiting some friends," she said lightly. "I'm flying to LA later today." Hal's eyes narrowed slightly. "MHM, when's your flight?" She nodded toward the overhead departure screen. "In about an hour." His gaze lingered, searching her face for any trace of nervousness. "You traveling alone?" "Yes." Her voice remained calm. She resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" Hal let the silence stretch before slowly handing her license back. The way he did it, deliberate, almost begrudging, made it clear that he saw it as a favor rather than a right. "Stay where I can see you," he barked, half smirking. It wasn't a joke. It was an order, one that had no legitimate basis, designed purely to keep her under his scrutiny. Naomi slid her license back into her wallet, her pulse steady but firm. In her peripheral vision, she saw a man in a navy blue windbreaker enter the bookstore. Her contact. She had to move now. Any delay could cost her the narrow window to retrieve the flash drive. With controlled ease, she gave Hal a polite nod. "Thank you, officer. I'll just be heading to the newsstand for a magazine." She gestured casually toward a kiosk. Hal pressed his lips into a thin line. He didn't want to let her out of his sight, but he couldn't outright stop her without overstepping. "I'll be around," he muttered, his voice low, a veiled threat. Naomi turned and walked away, exhaling the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That encounter could have gone much worse. She was lucky he hadn't insisted on searching her bag or forcing her into a private screening area. Cops like Truman knew how to exploit security procedures, using them as a smokescreen for harassment. But luck had its limits, and she had a mission to complete. She had to stay on high alert. If Hal persisted, everything was in jeopardy. Making her way to the bookstore, she spotted her contact browsing a display of bestsellers. He had short gray hair and appeared to be in his late 50s. As she approached, she pretended to scan a nearby shelf. Without looking at her, he murmured, "Name's Bill. Let's keep this quick." Standing side by side, flipping through random books, Naomi caught sight of Hal from the corner of her eye, still lingering nearby. She turned her back slightly to avoid drawing his attention. Bill discreetly slipped a small USB drive into her palm. The weight of it felt heavy with significance. This was the key to exposing a criminal network that likely extended far beyond Atlanta. "Everything you need is on there," Bill muttered. "Names, payment trails, shipping records. It's big, bigger than you think." He cleared his throat, flipping another page. "But be careful. Some local cops, TSA agents, maybe even higher-ups are involved. The corruption runs deeper than you'd expect." Naomi gave a slight nod, slipping the drive into a hidden pocket inside her blazer. She whispered back, "We'll handle it. You should go. Don't contact me again." Bill gave her an uneasy look, then set the book he was holding back on the shelf and strode out of the store. Naomi lingered for a few more seconds, feigning interest in her book before heading to the counter to pay for it. The exchange had lasted less than 90 seconds. Quick, simple, and incredibly risky if noticed. As she exited, her gaze met Hal's. His stare was intense, filled with suspicion and hostility. He knew something was off. Tension coiled in Naomi's chest. She had to shake him before boarding or she risked being detained. Now that she had the evidence, securing it was the priority. If Hal stopped her again, this wouldn't just be another ID check. This time, it could escalate into something far more dangerous. She slid the USB drive into the lining of her carry-on, tucking it into a specially modified compartment designed for undercover work, one that could keep sensitive materials hidden from casual searches. Her pulse thrummed with adrenaline as she walked toward gate 27, subtly glancing behind her. No sign of Hal. For a moment, she considered ducking into a restroom to send a coded message to her FBI handler, confirming she had the drive. But something held her back. If the local authorities had ears everywhere, a mistimed message could tip them off. Instead, she decided to wait until she was lost in the anonymity of a crowded terminal. She'd send the message once she was sure Hal wasn't trailing her. A nagging voice in her head warned her that Hal might do more than just watch. He could find a way to sabotage her flight, an unexpected issue with her boarding pass, a last-minute security flag, or some other bureaucratic obstacle to keep her stuck at the airport until it was too late. Bill's warning echoed in her mind. The corruption wasn't just limited to a few bad cops. It could stretch to TSA personnel, even airline staff. If that was the case, she needed to stay several steps ahead. Sure enough, as she neared gate 27, she spotted Hal. He was positioned near a coffee stand, partially hidden behind a large potted plant. He was trying to appear casual, but his rigid stance gave him away. Naomi kept moving, her posture controlled. If she simply vanished into the crowd, he might grow suspicious enough to call in an airport-wide alert. She needed a more strategic approach. The gate area was bustling, parents corralling energetic children, business travelers absorbed in their phones. Naomi scanned the seating area, searching for a spot that would give her an advantage. She spotted an empty seat beside an elderly woman by the window. Perfect. Sitting down, she placed her carry-on at her feet. From this angle, she could see Hal straining to maintain a clear line of sight. To blend in, she struck up a casual conversation with the woman, who was eager to share stories about her granddaughter's upcoming graduation. Naomi nodded politely, engaging just enough to appear like any other traveler killing time before a flight. After a few minutes, she excused herself and headed to the restroom. Moving through the crowd, she ensured that if Hal followed, he'd have to do so conspicuously. Inside, she locked herself in a stall and pulled out her phone. She quickly typed a coded message. "Package secure. Will board as scheduled." She sent it to a number known only to her FBI contact. A reply came almost instantly. "Understood. Stay safe." Naomi exhaled and checked her reflection before stepping back into the terminal. As she returned to the gate, she spotted Hal checking his phone, his jaw tight. He was likely communicating with someone, possibly a colleague or a superior. But what justification could he give for detaining her further? He hadn't found contraband. He had no probable cause beyond his own prejudices. Yet her instincts told her he wasn't done. Hal Truman wasn't the type to let things go. She took her seat again, pulling out the magazine she had bought earlier. She flipped through the pages absently, all while discreetly observing Hal. He was glaring at her over the edge of his phone. Occasionally, he would step aside to speak into his radio. She suspected he was trying to orchestrate one last obstacle, perhaps a sudden, random security check. The real question was, how far would he go? Her flight was boarding in 15 minutes. Her phone vibrated. A message from her FBI handler. Agents in LA standing by. Secure the drive. Naomi discreetly typed a reply, "We do." Then, she slipped the phone back into her blazer pocket, just moments before the boarding announcement. That's when she heard Hal's heavy footsteps approaching on the carpet. He stopped beside her, gesturing for her to stand. "Miss Cross," he said, his voice laced with authority. "I need you to come with me for additional screening." A hush fell over the surrounding passengers. Naomi could feel their eyes on her, silent questions hanging in the air. What had she done? Her pulse quickened, but she remained composed. Officer Truman had given no reason beyond a vague, additional screening. She knew that refusing could provide him with justification to escalate the situation, but complying meant putting her mission at risk. Calmly, she asked, "Why am I being selected, officer?" "I'm about to board my flight." Hal's smile was razor-thin. "Routine," he lied, scanning her face for any flicker of defiance. "We're conducting random spot checks, particularly for solo travelers." Naomi's mind raced for a strategy, one that wouldn't expose her, but also wouldn't let Hal dictate the situation. She exhaled slowly. "All right," she said, her tone measured. "Let me grab my bag." For a split second, Hal looked almost disappointed by how easily she agreed. But Naomi knew better than to resist too soon. If she fought back now, it would only give him more leverage to create a scene. She rose from her seat and followed him toward a security checkpoint, silently hoping the search would be quick and uneventful. If they found nothing, she could still make her flight. But she had a sinking feeling Hal wasn't interested in a standard inspection. He wanted something else. Maybe an excuse to humiliate her. Or worse, discover the drive she carried. At the checkpoint, Hal signaled for another officer, a younger man who looked hesitant. Naomi guessed he'd been pulled in as a witness, meant to lend legitimacy to the search. She braced herself. One wrong move and the entire operation could unravel. But her training had prepared her for moments like this, when the pressure was crushing, when every second mattered. She forced herself to stay calm. Somewhere in the hum of airport announcements and the flicker of overhead screens, she needed to find a way out of this unscathed. Hal led her into a small security office off the main concourse. The walls were sterile white, the overhead fluorescent light buzzing faintly. The younger officer, whose name tag read Anderson, stood stiffly near the door, arms crossed, looking uneasy. Naomi placed her carry-on on the metal inspection table as instructed. Hal nodded toward Anderson, who followed protocol. "Open the bag. Check all compartments." Naomi watched, keeping her breathing steady. She relied on the hidden lining in her bag to conceal the USB drive, but if they dug too deep or used advanced scanners, they might uncover it. The air in the room felt charged, like a wire pulled too tight. She kept her posture relaxed, hands resting at her sides, her eyes tracking every movement. She knew from experience, showing fear would only embolden someone like Hal. "All right, Miss Cross," Hal said, jotting notes onto a clipboard. "Empty your pockets. Remove your blazer and shoes." His eyes gleamed with something between satisfaction and anticipation, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Naomi complied without hesitation. Refusing would only escalate the situation. She placed her blazer on the table and stepped out of her flats. Officer Anderson ran a handheld metal detector over her arms, legs, and torso. The device beeped at her wristwatch and left earring, which he examined before waving them off as non-threatening. Meanwhile, Hal rummaged through her blazer pockets. He found only a small wallet, her phone, and a pack of gum. His frown deepened. Anderson, now unzipping compartments in her carry-on, methodically pulled out her laptop, a small cosmetic case, and 2 paperback novels. He set them aside for scanning. Then he reached for the hidden zippered pocket. Naomi's heartbeat spiked. Anderson's fingers brushed the lining. A knock at the door. Hal turned, clearly irritated. "Truman, got a minute?" The door swung open, revealing an African-American TSA supervisor. Her name tag read Rhonda Walker. She stepped inside with quiet authority, her voice firm yet calm. "What's going on here?" "Hal Stephenet. Security screening, Miss Walker. We have reason to believe." "Reason to believe what exactly?" she interrupted, arching a brow. Her gaze flicked to Naomi, shoes off, arms outstretched. A woman of color, detained for no clear reason. Rhonda turned to Anderson. "Everything all right here?" Anderson hesitated, caught between loyalty and discomfort. "Just following standard procedure, ma'am," he said quietly. Naomi could hear it in his voice. He didn't want trouble, but he felt trapped by Hal's orders. Rhonda's expression hardened. "I was notified about a possible abuse of screening protocols. We've had complaints. We can't just pull passengers from boarding without cause." She folded her arms. "May I see the documentation for this search?" Hal S. Joe clenched. His face flushed slightly. He hadn't expected to be challenged. "I'm in charge here, Miss Walker," he snapped. "We have every right to question suspicious passengers." Rhonda squared her shoulders. "According to TSA guidelines, you need a valid reason for heightened screening. As far as I understand, Miss Cross already cleared security." She paused. "Did she set off any alarms? Did a K-9 alert on her bag? Do you have an intelligence memo that requires this search?" Hal's mouth pressed into a tight line. He had nothing. Naomi watched the silent battle unfold in his eyes. Frustration, anger, the realization that he was losing control. Anderson, meanwhile, subtly stepped away from her bag, ceasing his search. Naomi exhaled silently, her gratitude for Rhonda immeasurable. Rhonda turned to her. "Ma'am, I apologize for the inconvenience. If there's no justifiable cause for this search, we'll make sure you can proceed to your flight." Naomi steadied herself, masking the relief crashing through her. "Thank you, Miss Walker," she said, her voice even. But inside, she knew this wasn't over yet. She longed to flash her FBI badge and explain the real reason she needed to be on that flight, but doing so would expose her entire covert operation. Instead, she kept her composure, remaining just another polite traveler who had been unfairly singled out. Truman's anger was palpable, practically radiating off of him. He was cornered. If he pressed on with the search without legitimate cause, he risked an official complaint or worse, disciplinary action. Then there was Rhonda, a TSA supervisor with enough authority to override his decision. Truman slammed the clipboard onto the table, his voice dripping with frustration. "I suppose Miss Cross is free to go," he muttered through clenched teeth, as if the words themselves were a struggle. Anderson handed Naomi her carry-on back, his face red with embarrassment. Naomi quickly slipped on her shoes and blazer, gathering her things. Rhonda gave her a reassuring nod as Naomi walked past Truman. Hal leaned in close, his voice barely audible, tinged with menace. "I know you're up to something," he murmured. "I'll be watching." Naomi shot him a cool, detached look, refusing to let him see any hint of vulnerability. Then, she turned away, her heart pounding in her chest. Once outside the security office, Rhonda walked with her a few steps, whispering, "I'm sorry about that, ma'am. This isn't the first time we've had complaints about Truman. If you need any assistance or wish to file a report, I can help you." "Thank you," Naomi replied softly, carefully selecting her words. "I might take you up on that, but for now I really need to catch my flight." Rhonda nodded and let her go. Naomi hurried toward gate 27, checking her watch. The final boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. She made it just in time, her carry-on in hand, eyes still alert as she settled into her seat. She couldn't relax, not yet. She half expected Truman to appear in the doorway with some last-minute excuse to drag her off the plane. But the doors shut, the engines roared to life, and Naomi sank into her seat, trembling with a mixture of relief and lingering anger. She owed a debt of gratitude to Rhonda Walker, the TSA supervisor who had stepped in at just the right moment. Allies could indeed appear in unexpected places, even in an environment rife with corruption. Naomi grasped the hidden USB drive, silently vowing to complete her mission. Not just for herself, but for those who faced discrimination every day, for those who stood against tyranny, and for the truth encrypted in that small piece of plastic and metal. Meanwhile, Officer Hal Truman seethed as he returned to his post. He'd been humiliated in front of a TSA supervisor and a rookie officer. Naomi Cross had slipped through his fingers under his watch. The rational part of him understood he had no solid evidence against her, but a darker, more stubborn part of him, one driven by prejudice, refused to let it go. He needed to prove she was a threat. He wanted vindication. He stormed into a break room that doubled as a makeshift office, shoving papers and coffee cups aside. Flopping into a swivel chair, he pulled out his phone with a scowl, dialing a number. He waited for the ring. Eventually, a gruff voice answered. "It's Truman," he growled. "Something's off about a traveler named Naomi Cross. She's on a flight to LA. If you can get your people to keep tabs on her, maybe she's just a civilian, but I've got a bad feeling about her." The voice on the other end fell silent for a moment, then replied, "Look, Hal, you know we only run these checks if there's a payoff. Got any reason other than your usual gut feeling?" Truman hesitated. He remembered the rumors of his associates' involvement in smuggling. If Naomi was somehow connected to them, maybe that would justify a deeper investigation. "I think she's carrying something," he said, even though he knew he was speculating. But his pride demanded he press on. The voice grunted. "We'll see what we can do, no guarantees. But you better not stir up any internal affairs trouble. Last thing we need is them snooping around." Truman scowled as the call ended. He glared at the wall, replaying the humiliating memory of Rhonda Walker confronting him. "We've had complaints, you can't just pull travelers from boarding without cause." Her words struck his pride like a knife. Clenching his fists, he stewed in anger. He was done playing by the rules. If no one else would see things his way, he'd handle it on his own. An hour later, he scrolled through his phone, looking for any sign that Naomi Cross was, in fact, involved in something illicit. He dug through the airport's internal incident logs, hoping for a match, but found nothing. If she had a criminal record, it was well hidden. She seemed to be spotless, too spotless. His paranoia only deepened. "She's too clean," he muttered to himself. "No one travels alone without a reason. She's up to something, I know it." His scowl deepened further when an email from Internal Affairs popped up in his inbox. The subject line read, "Requested statement, allegation of profiling." Truman's nostrils flared. Another complaint, likely regarding the incident with Naomi. It could also be about the many other times he'd targeted travelers of color. He hit the delete key without a second thought. He'd deal with it later. Leaving the break room, he strode down the airport police station's hallways. The harsh neon lights flickered above, casting an unwelcoming glow on the sterile white tiles. He passed by several higher-ranking officers' offices, receiving polite but wary nods. He could feel their disapproval, their growing weariness with his questionable stops and detentions. Truman knew his career was teetering on the edge. He'd been passed over for promotions, and the pile of complaints was becoming harder to ignore. But instead of reflecting on his actions, he let his anger and resentment fester. "I've given 20 years to this job, and they treat me like the villain," he muttered bitterly. The irony of his thoughts didn't occur to him. As the day dragged on, he made calls to a few of his contacts in the cargo and shipping sections of the airport, small-time criminals who occasionally fed him tips in exchange for certain favors. He wanted them to dig up anything on Naomi Cross, any suspicious baggage or paper trail. Most of them shrugged off his request, offering no valuable information. His request was met with a lack of response. None of the contacts had ever heard of her. One of them, however, was more forthcoming. "No hits, man. Sorry. We'd remember someone like her if she was messing with our operation." Frustrated, Truman ended the call. If official channels wouldn't give him anything, maybe he could conduct his own investigation. He began to imagine traveling to Los Angeles, tracking down Naomi, catching her red-handed. He fantasized about the praise he would receive for exposing a threat that others had missed. Then they would finally see that he was right all along. His daydreaming was interrupted by a sudden knock on the break room door. He looked up to find Rhonda Walker standing in the doorway, the TSA supervisor who had embarrassed him in front of that traveler. She wore a stern expression. "Officer Truman, can we talk?" she asked, stepping in without waiting for permission. He glared at her. "About what?" "About your behavior," she replied firmly. "We need to reach an understanding, or this is going to escalate." She gently closed the door behind her. Truman slammed his hand on the desk, sending a stack of papers tumbling. "I don't need a lecture from you," he growled. Rhonda's eyes flashed. "Actually, you do. If you want to save what's left of your reputation here," she said, crossing her arms and standing her ground. "You're walking on thin ice, Hal. People are watching. If you keep harassing travelers without just cause, it's not just your job that's at risk. It's the airport's liability." Truman leaned forward, using his height as leverage. "I know what I'm doing. If you and the others weren't so busy being politically correct, maybe you'd see the real threat right under your nose." Rhonda didn't flinch. "We deal with facts, not prejudice. If you have any facts, present them. Otherwise, I suggest you cool down." Her unwavering stance only fueled Truman's anger. He was cornered. He had no actual evidence to back up his suspicions. After a tense standoff, Rhonda left. Truman remained, staring at the empty doorway, his chest heaving. His rage simmered. If the system wouldn't help him, he'd deal with it himself. What he didn't realize was that every step he took down this path would lead to his unraveling. The more he sought illegal methods to prove his prejudiced hunches, the closer he came to exposing his own shady dealings. Eventually, he would cross paths with an FBI agent who was well-versed in dealing with crooked cops. Miles away, in the sky, Naomi Cross sat aboard the plane, the hum of the engines a constant presence as her mind raced. She pretended to be absorbed in a novel, but her thoughts were focused on the next steps. As soon as she landed in Los Angeles, she'd rendezvous with her FBI handler and a special forensics tech. They would examine the USB drive, verifying its data trail, bank transfers, shipping logs, possibly even a list of bribed officials. This was too big of a case to tackle alone. Naomi's role was to transport the physical evidence out of Atlanta. From there, a specialized FBI team could follow the leads, infiltrate the smuggling network, and gather the final pieces of the puzzle. She wondered if Hal Truman might show up again or if others like him were lurking in the background. The thought both angered and saddened her. Men like him tarnished the badge she believed in. Upon landing, Naomi felt a buzz on her phone. A secure message indicated her handler was waiting just beyond the gate. She disembarked, scanning the crowd. Sure enough, she spotted Agent Veronica Dunn, a tall woman with curly black hair, casually leaning against a pillar. Their eyes met, and Naomi gave a subtle nod. They walked through the crowded terminal, making small talk about the flight until they reached a quieter area near baggage claim. There, Naomi pulled the USB drive from her bag. Veronica's eyes sparkled with anticipation. "We've been waiting months for this kind of evidence," she said, placing the drive into a secure pouch. "Let's not celebrate just yet," Naomi cautioned. "The man who gave this to me says the corruption goes deep, some local cops, maybe some feds. We need to be careful who we trust." Veronica nodded in agreement. "We'll head to the field office, run a thorough scan. If everything checks out, we'll escalate to the Organized Crime Task Force." Naomi let out a breath. "Finally, let's do it." They made their way to a waiting SUV, the tinted windows offering them some privacy. Veronica drove them to the Los Angeles field office, a massive concrete building looming against the setting sun. Once inside, they descended to a secure lab. A technician greeted them with a quiet nod. He took the USB drive, handling it carefully with gloved hands, and plugged it into a dedicated laptop system isolated from the main network. Naomi and Veronica stood behind him as the screen flickered to life, displaying lines of code and folder trees. The tech typed rapidly, bypassing encryption and searching for hidden data. Naomi watched as folder names like contracts, payments, and transit schedules appeared on the screen. Her pulse quickened. If even half of this data was legitimate, it could trigger a nationwide sting operation. An hour later, the tech turned to them, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "It's real," he said, his voice steady. "Dozens of government officials, some small-time like airport security and local police. Others are higher up. Shipping routes, bribes, the whole operation. We've stumbled onto a massive ring here." Naomi exchanged a glance with Veronica. She thought about Hal Truman back in Atlanta, suspecting him to be part of the lower rungs, or at least a pawn in someone else's game. But the real question was, who was pulling the strings at the top? That would be their next big breakthrough. For now, they had enough to start building a case. The scale of it was staggering: millions of dollars in illicit transactions, arms crossing international borders, and possibly even terrorism funding. Veronica nodded decisively. "We need to coordinate with the task force immediately. This is bigger than we expected." Naomi allowed herself a brief smile of triumph. "We got it," she whispered. Months of undercover work, near-catastrophic close calls, and constant vigilance had led to this moment. She felt a profound sense of relief, but also an unspoken burden. There would be consequences for those involved. Some might become desperate, even violent. She thought of Bill, the informant who had risked his life to hand over the drive. Would he be safe? They quickly briefed a senior agent, who sat expressionless as he skimmed the summary. "Impressive work, Cross," he said after a pause. "We'll coordinate with law enforcement agencies across several states. For now, keep everything on a need-to-know basis. We can't risk tipping off the suspects." Naomi nodded, her mind already racing through the next steps. Officially, she was off the clock, free to rest. Unofficially, she'd remain alert. She stepped out of the office, the cool Los Angeles breeze brushing her face. The city lights sparkled, but her thoughts remained elsewhere, on Atlanta, where a certain cop might be digging his own grave while trying to uncover hers. Across the country in Georgia, Hal Truman paced through his living room. He'd gathered every scrap of information he could about Naomi: her name, flight route, her home address in Charlotte. Yet, something felt off. His phone buzzed. An informant had messaged, "No trace in LA. She's clean. Let it go." Truman's fists clenched. He couldn't let it go. Over the following days, he combed through social media, searching for any digital footprint. Naomi's accounts revealed nothing more than mundane posts about family or generic references to her job. She had listed a nondescript corporation as her employer. His frustration reached its peak as a voice inside taunted, "You're chasing a ghost." Yet part of him still believed she was hiding something. Every time he recalled her calm demeanor, it gnawed at his pride. Eventually, he turned his focus back to his regular duties, but an uneasy feeling settled in his gut. What Hal Truman didn't realize was that the clock was ticking. The FBI was about to move in, armed with evidence that would tie numerous crooked cops, and possibly him, directly to a vast criminal network. Naomi Cross had been the catalyst, and soon the entire conspiracy would collapse. The truth was out, and those involved would have nowhere to run. 2 weeks later, back in Atlanta, the airport bustled with holiday travelers. Among the crowds, several undercover FBI agents discreetly observed employees, cargo areas, and even local police, waiting for the signal to launch a massive operation. Naomi Cross stood among them, having flown in under a different alias. Her presence was unnoticed by most. The intelligence gathered from the USB drive had revealed an elaborate network, stretching from corrupt baggage handlers to high-ranking officials and shipping companies. Some were directly linked to a ring that smuggled weapons to conflict zones overseas. Hal Truman, while far from the mastermind, appeared in several conversation logs as a key checkpoint for certain suspicious cargo. It seemed he had accepted bribes to overlook certain shipments, likely justifying his actions with some twisted reasoning. Naomi's role that night was simple but crucial. Observe, confirm the presence of key suspects, and signal the strike team when the main players met for a covert handoff. She had spent the day blending in with travelers, keeping an eye out for Officer Truman among the security staff. Part of her hoped he wouldn't show. She wanted him apprehended without the risk of another personal confrontation. But fate wasn't so kind. Around 8 p.m., Naomi spotted Truman patrolling near a service corridor leading to the cargo area. He seemed uneasy, glancing at his phone repeatedly. She recognized the signs. A deal was about to take place. Another uniformed officer joined him, and they exchanged hurried words before moving toward a restricted area. Naomi discreetly radioed the FBI strike team. "Target in motion," she murmured into her lapel mic. "He's heading to Cargo Bay E." Within minutes, black-clad agents positioned themselves at strategic points. Naomi slipped into an employee-only hallway, silently trailing Truman at a distance. When he turned a corner, she ducked behind a stack of supply crates. Through a gap, she saw a scene that confirmed their worst suspicions. A group of men in plain clothes quietly unloading crates from a nondescript truck. The boxes had no official shipping labels. Truman oversaw the operation, nodding as the men loaded the crates onto a conveyor belt that bypassed standard inspections. Naomi's heart raced. Even after all her training, it was unsettling to witness law enforcement so openly involved in criminal activity. She whispered into her mic, "Visual confirmation of illegal cargo. Hal Truman present. Proceed." The earpiece crackled, confirming, "Green light. Move in." Just as the men prepared to move the crates deeper into the airport storage area, Truman checked his watch. The plan was likely to have the crates loaded onto a plane bound for an international destination. Naomi stepped out, tense. But just as one of the henchmen spotted her, she flashed her FBI badge. "Federal agent. Step away from the crates." Chaos erupted. Truman's eyes widened in shock as dozens of federal agents stormed in from multiple directions, guns drawn and badges flashing. They shouted orders. "Hands up! Don't move!" Several criminals attempted to flee, but agents quickly tackled them, confiscating weapons and phones. One man lunged at Naomi, but she quickly sidestepped and pinned him against a crate, twisting his arm behind his back. She then turned her gaze toward Truman, who stood frozen, breathing heavily, his face pale. In that moment, Naomi removed any doubt about who she was. "Officer Truman," she said, locking eyes with him. "Naomi Cross, FBI. You're under arrest for conspiracy, accepting bribes, and facilitating the smuggling of illegal arms." His expression shifted from shock to fury. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Finally, he managed a strained denial. You set me up." Naomi advanced, her voice calm and unwavering. "You set yourself up the moment you started taking dirty money. You only targeted me because of your own prejudice, and that led us straight to you." Two agents moved forward to cuff him. Truman jerked away, attempting to resist, but was quickly overpowered. "Wait!" he yelled, panic creeping into his voice. "You don't understand. I was just..." His excuses died in his throat. There was no way out. The evidence was irrefutable, and the FBI had it all. Naomi stood tall as the agents read Truman his rights. She felt no satisfaction in seeing a fellow officer fall, but she knew that justice had to be served. The other men, pinned and cuffed, exchanged accusing glares, as though they'd been deceived by the same illusions of easy money and power. Agents moved in to secure the cargo crates, each box now an undeniable piece of evidence in a federal criminal case. Truman's eyes burned with a mix of fear and rage as he was led away. Perhaps he finally understood how deeply he'd underestimated the suspicious traveler in the concourse, or how thoroughly he'd become entangled in the web of corruption. Either way, the consequences were now inescapable. Naomi watched silently as the scene unfolded, a moment that underscored how prejudice, greed, and abuse of power ultimately destroy the very people who cling to them. In the days following the airport sting, media outlets broadcasted stories about the corruption scandal at Hartsfield-Jackson. Mugshots of crooked cops and smugglers flashed across screens, with Officer Hal Truman among them. His once proud reputation was in ruins, undone by greed and prejudice. At the Atlanta FBI field office, Naomi Cross quietly compiled her final report. Despite the sense of vindication, she felt no joy. Seeing a fellow law enforcement officer betray the badge was always bitter. Yet, the takedown had uncovered a massive arms smuggling conspiracy and saved countless lives from potential violence. As Naomi reviewed the documents, TSA Supervisor Rhonda Walker stopped by to offer a heartfelt thank you. Truman's exposure meant real change for airport security procedures. Rhonda's relief was evident. Honest officers could now do their jobs without fear of being overshadowed by corruption. That evening, Naomi made one final sweep through the airport before heading home. Standing by a window overlooking the busy runway, she reflected on the cost of Truman's racism and illicit dealings. She found a small comfort in knowing that justice, at least for now, had prevailed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Bill, the brave informant. "I'm safe. Thank you." Naomi smiled, tucking the device away. Outside, the roar of departing planes reminded her that the world kept moving forward, even after moments of crisis. Boarding a flight with her mission complete, Naomi gazed at her FBI credentials. This victory was just one step in the larger fight against corruption, racism, and wrongdoing within law enforcement. It wouldn't disappear overnight, but every exposed scheme brought them closer to accountability. Steeling herself for the next battle, she settled into her seat. For now, justice had won, and tomorrow she would be ready for whatever came next. Thank you for joining me on this intense journey, where we witnessed the fall of a corrupt officer and a fearless undercover FBI agent's triumph. This story reminds us of an undeniable truth. Racism and corruption undermine the very fabric of law enforcement. It takes courage, both from individuals within the system and from ordinary citizens, to expose wrongdoers. Agent Naomi Cross stood up against discrimination and danger, and her steadfast commitment to justice ultimately brought the guilty to their knees. If this tale moved you and had you rooting for the truth, I invite you to show your support. Please like this video, share it with friends who value stories of justice, and subscribe to this channel for more dramatic, real-life inspired narratives. Together, let's stand against prejudice and champion those who fight for what's right, wherever and however that fight may unfold. Safe travels and stay vigilant.